This week I've got Late Night, which is a movie I am so excited to talk about. I was lucky enough to see it back at Sundance, and since then I've just been sitting there going, I really want other people to see this film. I really want my friends to see this film. I think it's so funny. It's so smart. It's so dead on for, fortunately and unfortunately, what the experience of being a woman in the workplace is. It's written by and stars Mindy Kaling, and it also has Emma Thompson, Hugh Dancy, John Lithgow, Ike Barinholtz, and Amy Ryan. And basically, Emma Thompson is like the only female late night comedy talk show host. So if you are a fan of late night talk shows, which I think there is actually a huge subset out there, people who are just like appreciate the art, I want to say, of that, the talent required to do that. Either way, it's a certain type of comedy for sure. So Emma Thompson plays, the only female, basically, late night host, and Mindy Kaling is a woman who wants to be a writer and comedian, and she ends up getting hired as the only female staff member. And just the number of moments in this film that were so hilariously and also horrifically accurate to being a woman in the workplace. I couldn't count them because it's just so good. And I want to be very clear. This movie is funny independent of gender, right? This is just a funny movie because it's two very funny, very smart people. It's fun to see Emma Thompson as this kind of sassy British lady, which is kind of what I assume she really is. Mindy is, once again, some sort of form of Mindy, which is one of my favorite things, right? Mindy is a delightful human being. It's simultaneously inspiring, depressing, funny, and has heart. So there's very few reasons not to watch this movie. I'm going to keep harping on this, but especially if you are a woman in a male-dominated industry and you are in any sort of leadership position, like this is the movie for you to go see. Like, and the way it's just so accurate. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Not a perfect film, of course. No film is perfect. There are some moments where I'm like, oh, I wish that like they had managed to do this without having to introduce this sort of storyline. But, so fantastic. Really, really appreciated it. It's like a slightly less depressing snapshot of like post-Me Too moment. Still acknowledges it, but if you don't want to wallow in pity and you need like hope and any sort of thing along those lines, like Late Night is the movie for you. Please go see it. 4.5 out of 5. The other film I have this week is another film festival favorite, apparently. It opened Cannes. It's The Dead Don't Die from Jim Jarmusch, who is not everyone's cup of tea. He's not necessarily everyone's not cup of tea, if that makes sense. I enjoy certainly a lot of his work. I'm not like the biggest Jim Jarmusch fan, but I'm not someone who's like, ugh, this guy. I think he's had some amazing works. I love anytime he has Tilda Swinton in a movie, and thankfully Tilda Swinton is in this movie, but that's about as far as my thankfully goes. So it stars Bill Murray, Adam Driver, Tilda Swinton, Chloe Sevigny, Steve Buscemi, Danny Glover, Caleb Landry Jones, Rosie Perez, Iggy Pop, RZA, Selena Gomez, and Tom Waits. So, quite the cast it's got going there. And it's the zombie apocalypse. That's pretty much zombie apocalypse in a small town. And so my challenge with this film is that there's a level of self-reference that is funny, or there's a level of acknowledgement or breaking the fourth wall that like I find funny, and then there's a level that's just like it's too infrequent and it doesn't feel like a commitment to it. It's just sort of like we're going to try this out and like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But I think that was a distracting factor from this movie. I love Bill Murray. I love Tilda Swinton. It's an actually underplayed Bill Murray performance, which is always kind of fun to see these days. You can't argue with the musical prowess of some of the people in it, but the acting prowess is debatable. There's also moments that I get frustrated with. It's like, why is Selena Gomez in this movie? Not as an insult to Selena Gomez, but was she the most needed person for this role? Also, why is her role like somewhat fetishized? Why is there, of course, a character who like knows everything about film? Like, why did that scene have to be in this movie? What did it add to the value of this movie? Obviously, it's a stand-in for every, like, probably male film director out there who's like, someday my knowledge of this, like, B cinema is gonna get me the girl. And I was just like, this is distracting and unnecessary. Watching the film, again, it does have zombies in it. And I was bored. I was kind of bored by them. I'm not the biggest fan of zombies. I'm not a big fan of horror, but I watched like The Walking Dead, and this has similar kind of levels of gross, but didn't feel like there was a ton of reasoning aside from like, hey, let's show these carcasses. Overall, I don't think I enjoyed the meta factor here. There were moments that shone, but as a whole, I almost felt like maybe he was trying to go too mainstream with this. You know, it does follow like a general zombie movie formula, and that it's really hard to reinvent that genre. And then at the end, it just gets super weird, and it's just like, okay, cool, do your thing, I guess. But I give up as an audience member trying to follow any sort of threads of logic or reason to this. So I did not particularly love it. I think if you're a huge Jim Jarmusch fan, even you might be disappointed because it isn't the most Jarmuschian, if that's an adjective that I'm going to make up right on the spot. But I'm not... a question I ask myself often is, who is this movie for? And I certainly do not have an answer for that, unless the answer is supposed to be Jim Jarmusch fans. But even then, I don't think it necessarily delivers that service. So I'm only going to give it 2.2 out of 5. And then the last movie I have this week is called American Woman. And if you have been feeling sorry and bad for yourself and want to watch somebody else have a worse time and put that in perspective, you can watch American Woman. It stars Sienna Miller, Christina Hendricks, Aaron Paul, and Will Sasso. And so the idea is that Sienna Miller plays a, youngish woman, in her 30s, and then her teen to almost adult daughter goes missing. And then it kind of takes you on this journey over, it has to be a considerable amount of time. It probably was at least like 10, 12, 13 years. She gets, her daughter has a kid, because apparently this is a history repeating itself thing, and she ends up raising her grandson as a byproduct of her daughter going missing. And it just becomes all these little sad vignettes. This woman has been dealt it's been tough. She has not been lucky. And so you just follow her. But like the family drama stuff is finely acted, right? Christina Hendricks plays Sienna Miller's sister. They live like across the street from each other. Aaron Paul shows up at some point as a romantic interest. But it's just such a bummer. But the thing that to me that was the most confusing, and by the end I was like, what the hell was the point of the middle of this movie, is that you have this super traumatic event happen. And yes, it gets referenced every once in a while, but a lot of the issues she deals with are driven by external factors that don't necessarily have to do with her daughter's disappearance. But you have this huge, menacing, horrible thing happen to her, and then you kind of don't use it to the fullest extent. It's just a bizarre decision to me. And by the end, like a slight spoiler in that you do finally come back to this storyline, but it feels like almost, I don't know, is it dark to say too little too late? And the investment in it is just not there. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, like I get that you're trying to, this is a very actor piece in that, oh, we'll have her upset and we'll have these horrible things happen to her and this, that. And in that sense, like, okay, fine, female-led film, kind of a bummer that, of course, it has to be like, horrible things happen to her. But there's just so much missing that feels like they set up for this whole thing to be about, like, hey, her daughter's missing. They just kind of drop that. And so it's very bizarre. It feels very unfulfilling at the end. It's a downer. If you're looking for this is the problem. It's a downer, but it's not even like cathartic, cry it out downer. It's just a downer. So I'm only going to give it 3 out of 5.